Russell Standish joins the Steve and Friends live stream to talk about Minsky. Minsky is an open-source system dynamics software package designed to model economic systems. Be kind, stay safe, and enjoy the show.
Welcome back to Steve and Friends. It's April 22nd, 2023. We have Russell Standish on the show today. I did a pre-record with him because he's in Australia, so a different continent. This time would not work for him. Russell Standish is the chief developer of the Minsky software created by none other than Professor Steve Keen. So we've been wanting to have him on the show for a while. Very important person to me because he is essentially the major connection between Steve and I. Had I never used Minsky, I don't think I would have ever had the pleasure of meeting Steve, doing this live stream, being able to pick his brain on economics. So the first part will be a recorded version of the show. I will just put up our sponsor. I promised every episode that I would pump these guys up. They make little audio and videograms you can put on your social media. So if you're doing a live stream like myself with Steve, you can record the audio or video, make a nice little square thing, put it on your Facebook, your Twitter, etc. They are providing that service to us for free, and we are thanking them greatly. Now, you can sign up for them if you'd like. They have a free version. They put a little watermark on it, or you can upgrade and get more features without the watermark. So check them out. They're Recast Studio. You can find their URL. It is recast.studio. We're going to cover a bunch of things after the record with Russell. We'll get Steve to talk about Minsky himself. Mike, of course, is on the show, so he's a big system dynamics guy. So we'll get his opinion on everything. Daniel Sanderson, my friend, Daniel Sanderson, will be there as well. Make sure you're chatting on this thing over here. It really helps with the algorithm to show that there's engagement. Also, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you're watching on Twitter, make sure you retweet and like it there. And then come over here, make sure you're doing that chat thing. I'm going to bring on Mike Radzicki first. Mike, how you doing, buddy?
Hey, I'm doing well, Ty. Good to see you.
Good. It's great to see you as always. We're going to sit in the background and watch this fine interview I did. Now, for the people in the audience, I'm not a reporter or an interviewer, so I had to use my own style. I mostly geek out with system dynamics, so hopefully it translated into value for the viewers, what system dynamics is and what Minsky is, and hopefully it translates into value for Mike Radzicki. So at the end of this recording, he doesn't look at me and say, that was terrible. I'm going to bring on Professor Steve Keen. Steve is frozen. This is
hey guys, how are you? How are you both?
Hi, Steve. Good to see you, man.
Hi, mate.
Yeah.
Just hope I've got better reception. I'm back in London again now, so I've got my dodgy internet connection over here. But I went out and forked out for Vodafone today, so hopefully it's better than bloody World Sim, which was a total waste of money and time.
Right. Well, you know what, Steve? At this point, your internet connection troubles have become part of the fabric of the show. So if you were to get a good internet connection, we might even lose viewers because something would have changed.
Yeah, that's true. There's a certain part of flavor. Yeah, if I'm not struggling to make a connection, there you go.
All
A bit
right.
like
Well,
car
you know
crash
what?
videos
Let's.
without a car crash.
Oh, I love car. I actually like train crash videos, but that's a whole nother story. Hey, look at there's Daniel
Oh, yeah.
Sanderson in the chat there. Make sure you say hello in the chat. You've got any questions during the recording I'm about to play, please post them. We'll try to answer any of your questions, whether it's Steve, Mike, or myself, or even Daniel Sanderson. So I'm going to queue up this video. I'm going to put Mike and Steve in the background, and we'll see you in about 53 minutes for the full live afterwards. Russ, how you doing, buddy?
Good. I think we're getting some major traction now with getting some work done on Minsky. So yeah, things are going well.
Perfect. We're going to talk a whole lot about Minsky today. I think the first thing I want to do, and I do this with all the guests on the live stream, and we're doing, of course, a record here, is because the show is called Steve Keen and Friends, I usually ask what the connection is to Steve Keen. So my question is, how did you meet Steve?
Yes, well, that's a very good question. So years ago, I was working for the University of New South Wales, and I started off as a consultant in parallel programming, and so I was sort of hosted in the computer center. And then sort of later on, I got booted up into management, and I was running a team of basically IT professionals. But I've had a long-term interest in complex systems research and artificial life and evolution type processes. And so thinking back to, I think it was about 1995, I guess, and Steve, who was a PhD at UNSW, was decided to run a conference called Complexity, Economics and Evolution, or something like that. And well, maybe it's Commerce, Complexity and Evolution, or something like that. So I thought, well, that's interesting. I know a bit about at least two of those topics. So, and I didn't know of anyone else at UNSW with anywhere near the sort of interest in this area. So I thought it'd be interesting to meet up. So we met up for lunch, and that was the start of a friendship now that's been going for nearly 30 years. So yeah, that's how I met Steve. Yeah, so he persuaded me to put a paper into his conference, and first time I've written an economics paper, which was quite an experience. One of the things that floored me, I suppose, is I wrote my standard sort of scientific paper, which is probably about 10 pages long, covers a few points, quite succinctly. And the comments came back from the economics reviewers and saying, this is a very short paper, expand it. And so, well, I did. I added a few more points, but I think they were just looking for more verbosity.
So let me see. How did the whole genesis of Steve coming to you, asking for help with Minsky develop? Like, what was he doing pre-Russ involvement? Like, I am aware that there was Quid before Minsky. Kind of tie that process together. How did you become involved? And what was that conversation like? Okay, hey, I can do this for you, Steve. Kind of tell me that process.
Yeah, so this was obviously much later on. Yeah, Steve and I had collaborated on a few research projects, including his criticism of the theory of the firm. Had done some work, so we're good friends by this stage. At the time, I was I've been essentially freelancing since about 2006. I guess is when I hung my shingle out. And at the time, I had a major gig with the what was called the Road Traffic Authority here in New South Wales. And the RTA was developing software for managing traffic lights. And it's software that's actually sold to all around the world, hundreds of different cities. So I was sort of employed in this project, a specific project under that umbrella. So I was working on traffic lights, but I had, before starting that, made sure that I was able to take on other work. And in fact, I'd done a side project with a finance company that I had worked with previously. And but anyway, Steve had won some funding from the INET, whatever that is, the New Economics Foundation, and was basically he approached me and said, "Oh, do you know someone who could take on this work?" And I said, "Well, yes, I could do it," because I was always looking at trying not to be pigeonholed into one particular project, and I thought that this looked like an interesting project to do. And he basically turned around and said, "Yeah, I was hoping you'd say that." So we started off pretty much. I said, "Okay, I could do a proof of principle." It was essentially I don't know whether we're calling it the Aristotle version of Minsky at that stage, but it was certainly version 1.D1, first release, and essentially had the ability to, I think you could only have one Gobbly table and a bunch of flows, and the canvas concept that we all love, and you could wire up and it would create the differential equations and solve that and display it in a plot. And I said, okay, I'll work on that. It'll probably take about a month or so, and for 10 grand. And so, yeah, I hit that milestone, I think, with some time to spare. So, yeah, so that was kind of really the start of Minsky. He actually had, I think, received $125,000 in that first grant. So he said, "Oh well, let's continue, let's expand, let's make it bigger and better." So so it's really grown from that first initial base. And part of the initial success was the fact that I was leveraging the Tickle TK canvas object, which there really is almost nothing like it around. I think there is, like the D3 canvas in the JavaScript world, may approach that sort of level of support of basically giving us the functionality of a canvas that you could place things on, move things around relatively easily. Plus, I was also leveraging, by that stage, more than 20 years of Ecolab development, which Ecolab is essentially an agent-based simulation system that I've been using for my own research. And so I was able to essentially leverage the work there. I did, at the time, consider using other technologies. I considered using Java because at that time the RTA were going big in the Java world. We were having to retool all our C++ work into Java, which I should say that particular top-down edict pretty much killed the project that I was working on. It did not survive. So don't try and change horses midstream. It's hard work. It is kind of a software development lesson. But I decided, well, no, because I wasn't that familiar with Java, and it was going to put a huge development drag on just trying to get something, a working prototype effectively working. The other technology I considered was Qt, which was a C++ graphics API. Which is a very nice toolkit, but again, for the same reason, I thought, let's just stick with something that I know intimately well, just to get something going. And yeah, so that was really kind of the start of Minsky. So I might let you ask this question. I'm talking too much, probably.
No, so just to kind of give the viewers an idea of what we're talking about, what Minsky is a system dynamics software package. There's Vinsim, Stella, in the engineering world, Simulink. Kind of tell the audience what system dynamics is, and also give contrast to it with something that's really popular out there in the modeling world, which is agent-based modeling. Maybe talk about what system dynamics is and what agent-based modeling is comparatively.
Okay. Yep. Sure. They're certainly two very different approaches to modeling. So in terms of the simulation dynamics, the idea is that you describe your system in terms of a bunch of quantities that flow between your variables in the system, and they will accumulate. So the accumulation process is what's known as stocks, and the other parts are known as flows. So the idea is that you can represent this whole system visually as a series of pipes connected to basins, and your basins are your stocks in the system, and the level of the water in the basin goes up and down based on the balance of inflow and outflow from the basin or reservoir. And then in terms of how that thing gets turned into something that's simulated, the whole thing gets represented as basically a first order differential equation. So it's in terms of complex systems, dynamical systems, everything is a first order differential equation, and the right hand side of the equation is the complicated system of connections between the different variables that make up the system, and the left hand side is just dx dt, where x is a vector of components. So yeah, so you can make use of there's lots of standard packages out there for solving differential equations, for integrating the differential equations. So we use one from the just called the GNU Scientific Library, so GNU SL. It's quite a well-known package of very standard numerical algorithms, and it has some very good differential equation solver. So that's what we use in Minsky. So that in essence is what systems dynamics is. It's just a way of being able to represent a dynamical system, i.e. a first order differential equation, as a visual representation of pipes and reservoirs. And the system just has various features around that. In terms of agent-based modeling, it's a very different concept. So in an agent-based system, you try and describe components of the system as individuals. So let's say we're used to talking about simulating economies here. So in a systems dynamics approach, you would be kind of doing like a macroeconomics approach. So you would have various variables such as like average wage, total wage build, total output from an industry sector, that sort of thing. Whereas in an agent-based model, what you do is you write bits of computer code that represent an individual in that economy, going about their life, doing everyday tasks. So generally speaking, it's a cartoon version of an individual in this economy. You don't try and simulate them having breakfast, for instance. That's probably not particularly important for your simulation, but you might simulate them having to go to work, earn money, then going out shopping, choosing some shopping items, those sort of things. So as you might imagine, it's a very much more fine-grained simulation process, so that has consequences for the amount of computational resources required. But the benefits of doing that is that you can get all sorts of emergent phenomenon coming out from the way that the different agents in the system interact with each other. And that is tends to be the real interest in your agent-based simulation, trying to pick up these emergent things that may not come out of doing a top-down simulation approach of the economy, because in the top-down approach you tend to think about what's going to be how the various top-down components of the system going to interact with each other. So yeah, that's essentially the difference.
Right. So we'll switch gears now. Let's talk about the most unique feature for Minsky, and that's the godly tables. I want you to tell me and the audience how they work. What are the rules employed by them? And during the live, what I'll do is I will put some screenshots just so the audience gets an idea of what you're talking about. Just kind of talk about that, how they work. You know,
Okay.
what are the rows? What are the columns? What are the rules?
Okay, so yeah, the godly table was essentially Steve's invention, and the idea behind it is to basically do double entry bookkeeping of your accounts. So if you're simulating finance operations, then what you would do is you could, in your godly table, the columns are the stocks in your system. So in this case, they'd be like bank accounts that you keep, and you divide them up in an accounting fashion between assets, liabilities, and equities. And the idea is that when you have, if you do your double entry bookkeeping accounting correctly, you would make sure that for every asset in your system, there's a matching liability somewhere in the system. And so across the row of your godly table, you need to have the assets matched with the liabilities and equities. And it's not like a sum across the total. In fact, I think some of our earlier implementations of this actually got the fundamental accounting relation wrong, where we're just summing up assets, liabilities, and equities, and effectively liabilities and equities have to be treated with the opposite sign to assets. So we've now got that correct. So each row of the godly table corresponds to a financial flow in the system, and so the sum of those have to be zero. Well, they're required to be zero in the sense that the godly table will tell you whether they're zero or whether they're imbalanced. Of course, if you're not doing financial accounting, there's actually the Minsky system is quite happy to simulate your system if they don't balance. That's not important. And in fact, because the columns are just simply stocks within the simulation system, you can actually use the godly table to simulate things other than money. And I think your example of the SIR model for COVID management was a good classic example of where you might use a godly table for something else. And in there, the various columns of the godly table correspond to the different stages of the disease as they progress through the population. So the number of people who are susceptible, the number of people who are infected currently, the number of people who have recovered are different entries in that table. Yeah, so that in essence was what the godly table is. In somewhat earlier on, we allowed the ability to have multiple godly tables, which can be interlinked. And the idea there is that each godly table can therefore represent a different sector of the ecosystem. So you might have a godly table representing the banks, another one that represents the government sector, another one that represents the private sector. And so as money flows between these different sectors, they are modeled by asset liability relationships between the different godly tables. And in so doing, this invention really solves a key fundamental problem with system dynamic systems, that of making sure that there's a consistency in your flows between parts of the system. Because it's very easy if you're trying to do this thing in another systems dynamic software like the Stellar or so on. It's actually very easy to put in a flow, but then forget to put the counteracting part of the flow in the other part of the system. So in having this consistency imposed really does make those sorts of errors impossible to make.
Yeah, I did a demonstration video just with one Minsky godly table, and I replicated it in Vinsim, and of course it generated just a spaghetti diagram that doesn't tell you anything. Now imagine multiple godly tables in Vinsim wired together, and now the assets and liabilities are reversed, and you're trying to get the equations for the equity. It's a ton of work, right? And the godly tables, they solve all that instantly, like instantly. So it's yeah, it's and like you said, there's they're mutually exclusive flows, so it can be applied to many things, like a compartment model for the pandemic, like I did. One thing, I wish, I know you're a one-man army, but it would be really cool if you could turn off the accounting rules on the godly table, but you still use it as a matrix for your stocks and flows. So in other system dynamic programs, they use arrays. So basically, it's your stocks are stacked on each other. So let's say my pandemic model had three arrays. First time infection, recovered, and vaccinated. And in the other programs, it's basically they're stacked on top of each other. You click on it and you'll see the three individual stocks. Well, the godly table, you don't need to have that. You see it all right there. And I always thought, that would be cool if you could just turn off the accounting rules and just use it as your stocks and flows, kind of like a matrix.
Well, the thing is, you can do that. You can ignore that accounting column. It's just there as a modeling aid.
Yeah.
So you can totally ignore it. In fact, in the very early days of Minsky, we didn't have an integral operator. So the only way you could implement a stock was via a godly table.
Oh, wow.
So,
wow.
And yeah, I mean,
that would have been tough, because a few weeks ago, I'm trying to build kind of a MMT game, and I wanted to keep everything in the godly table I could, as possible. So one thing that Steve always does in his little demonstration models is he uses the integral block for the capital accumulation in the system. Well, I decided that's a financial stock, and I put it in the godly table. But there are situations where the godly table is not applicable, and that's like your population. So if that would have been a bit of a complaint of mine 10 years ago had I used Minsky and I had to model the population in an accounting table.
Well, yeah, but you can do it. It works. I mean, it's mathematically equivalent. It's really more a matter of the aesthetics of the system. An integral block is kind of nice and tidy, I suppose, whereas if you're modeling population growth by having to have a separate godly table, it would seem clunky to use, but it's mathematically equivalent underneath. So
Right.
It's all doable.
What are your, let's say you got the $1 million grant, and thanks to Rob Johnson, who we had on a few months ago from iNet. Thank you again for that first grant there, Rob, if you're watching this. I often tell Steve, the way we met, was probably because of you, Rob from iNet, and Daniel Sanderson, who helps me do this podcast. So I always make sure I say thank you to him, and I should say thank you to you, because if there was no Minsky, I wouldn't have paid attention to Steve. Although I found his theories interesting now, that was the catalyst for me.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, it's.
So
I think that has happened a lot with Steve's work. That Minsky is kind of a hook, particularly with his explanation for how money is created. It's just perfect for explaining that. So
it's actually it's amazingly great. For instance, before I kind of got into economics, I'm an armchair economist. I'm not trained as one, but I got into economics in 2008, the financial crisis. First book I happened to read was a guy with the same last name as me, The General Theory, by John Maynard Keynes. But I always had a hard time with the math and understanding it. And it wasn't until Minsky and then watching a lot of Steve's YouTube videos that things started clicking, how an economy works. Though I will add, I still don't understand general stochastic equilibrium models. I still don't know.
No, well, I've never really attempted to understand that either. So, I mean, again, I'm not from an economics background.
Yeah. So tell me what your wish list for the future is for Minsky. If you had $1 million, what would you implement?
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing about this is that I would probably be looking at trying to get back to doing my own research, which, as I said, was in. Just shut this phone up. Sorry about that. I want to get back to doing my own research in artificial life. I have a whole bunch of projects stacked up, which I haven't worked on for at least 5 years, probably longer actually, maybe even getting closer to 10. So my big wish list is actually to reboot my research. I often say, well, don't mention the R word. So my R word is rebooting research. So yeah, given $1 million, I would like to try and employ some other people and train them up into being able to work on Minsky to give it the future that it really deserves. So for now, unfortunately, it mostly falls on me. I've got someone who's joined us occasionally, this Dutch programmer who has done some nice work on the variable and godly tab in terms of using. Sorry, that's distracting me from Wade's message. Sorry about that. Yeah, so. Yeah, so we've got a Dutch programmer, Niels Rademacher, who has done some nice work in tarting up the godly table pop-up window and the variable and parameter tabs, like displaying that LaTeX using MathJax. And so, yeah, I mean, if we can get someone like him or even a few people, $1 million would probably support a few people for a while. We could get some traction going and hopefully, allow me to get back to doing what I want to do. So yeah, that's my personal wish list. In terms of where Minsky is headed, I could give some background on that.
Please.
So yeah. So part of it, which I think Steve has been talking a bit about, is the integration of Ravel into Minsky, which allows you to import data sets, some we're scaling up to now some really quite big data sets. I'm inclined to use the cutoff. Anything which can't fit into Microsoft Excel is big data. I don't know whether that's typically used or not, but I think anything that Excel can handle is small data, and anything that can't is big data. So we're now able to import data sets which are bigger than what Microsoft Excel does. It took a bit of sweat and tears to get that far. But there's much more to be done. I particularly want to spend some time getting the data processing part to utilize the GPU. So currently everything is all single-threaded and just using a single CPU. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there to be done to make the system far more responsive and able to handle big systems.
Tell me what the difference is there. You said single string and trying to move everything on the CPU. Explain that a little more. I'm assuming.
Yeah. So current computers, they have multiple CPUs. Typically, an entry-level system might have 4 cores in their main processing package. Minsky only uses 1, so everything must be congested. So you're using a quarter of the hardware. Plus, usually computers will have a dedicated what's called a GPU, which is essentially it's a device that manages your video display. But in essence, what it is a very powerful vector processor. So basically like a Cray supercomputer from the 1980s. It's that sort of architecture. And for the last at least 15 years, high performance computing world has been, everything has got to move onto these using the GPUs, which are now rolling. They're just standard. They're in your laptops, they're in your desktops, they're even on your mobile phones. There's some sort of GPU system in there. And it's very good for running, for doing vector calculations. And now is getting the sorts of models, such as the sorts of models that you come up with. They're big enough that they can actually make effective use of this hardware. But currently, the software is not set up to use it.
So this is to increase performance. So, for instance, I've done the Urban Dynamics replica model by Jay Forster, and it's a little bit slow on Minsky. Would this process increase simulation times? Would it help that?
Quite dramatically.
Okay.
I would imagine that probably for the sort of scale models that you're used to doing, we might be seeing 10 to 100 times performance improvement. It's got that sort of potential. A lot of the models that we had before, that Steve has worked on and so on, you wouldn't see much, which is why I hadn't put much effort into it in the past and focused more on the user interface side of things. But now that we're getting bigger models, there's definitely some low-hanging fruit there. I'm trying to think what else is. Some of the other things that I think are important is better ways of importing and exporting to other systems, dynamics systems. We currently have some partial VenSim support. You can import VenSim models. But in the same way, you want to be able to export to some types as well. So on the list, I think XMile is one of the formats which I think Stella supports from memory. And Modelica is another one that looked like an interesting target to import and export from. So there's the potential there for Minsky to become effectively a front end to Modelica. But the trouble is all of this requires programming resources, and I've only really got so much time that I can put into this, and these things have tended to lay somewhat fallow for a while, waiting for when you can bump them up into priority.
Well, hey, I buy lottery ticket. I buy one lottery ticket a week, so
hey, if I hit it big, I'll help you out.
Well, our big lottery ticket at the moment is actually Ravel, which is effectively a proprietary plugin for Minsky for handling big data, and we can see the value that this might provide for people who need to analyze data sets coupled with the power of Minsky. And the plan is that, yes, if we make it big with being able to sell or license Ravel, we will be funneling quite a lot of those funds back into the development of Minsky. But
you know what? Actually, tell me more about Ravel. What is it?
yeah, so this was another invention of Steve's that he had back in the 1980s when he was at the time he was a software reviewer for, I think it was Australian PC Magazine or something similar. And so he designed a front end for what sort of databases are called. It was a particular database that was around at the time, which was quite innovative. It wasn't, I can't think of the terminology of it, but basically it treats your data as a hypercube. So it's multi-dimensional, and you can then manipulate that hypercube. You can rotate it. You can slice it in different ways. You can drill down into elements of it. And so the particular database that he was reviewing at the time had a command line interface. And so he designed essentially a graphic interface just sketched on paper. The problem with that was that database was bought by Oracle and then killed a few years later. It's no longer an existing product. And the whole database world went the SQL route. And yeah, I mean, SQL's all well and good, but it doesn't actually suit this particular way of being able to analyze data. So yeah, so I think it was in 2014, and I think it was at a time when the Ravel funding, because we got that initial INET grant, and then we were funded through a Kickstarter campaign, which kept us going for another year or so. And we had the promise, which never eventuated, of a fairly substantial grant from the Ecuadorian government. And so while we were kind of waiting for, that to come about, we thought, well, Steve basically told me about his concept of Ravel. And I thought, well, okay, I've basically got a bit of spare time at the moment. I can probably look at trying to get a proof of concept on that. So I sort of did that a bit in my own spare time. So this is a project that we've been working on now. So next year will be 10 years that we've been developing that. And for the last 5 years, we've essentially been integrating that into Minsky. And so we now have actually a very powerful platform with Minsky plus Ravel that allows you to set up dashboards and to be able to do quite sophisticated data analysis on some fairly big data sets. So yeah, and I guess one of the things that can come out of that is that you could then add a simulations dynamics simulation on top of that and do things like data matching, or to perhaps do a parameter space exploration to try and find the right parameters for your model to match the data, and do that sort of thing. So there's a lot of two-way sort of process of doing it. So we're in the process of trying to commercialize Ravel at the moment, and it's really a question of watch this space. We'll either end up selling it for a substantial amount of money, which we can then put back into developing Minsky as an open source modeling platform, or we'll end up actually bringing it to market ourselves and hopefully making money out of that will in turn fund Minsky. So yeah, that's where it is.
So would you say, and I might have the structure of this wrong, at this point, and things may change, Ravel is a commercial version of Minsky. If you were planning to sell, let's say, sell it to somebody else, would it be sold with Minsky in the background, or would it be separate? Because I've used Ravel and I can use it to build a system dynamic model and just not use the data import features. How would that work?
So Ravel is basically a proprietary plugin to Minsky. So it's the idea is that if you choose to buy Ravel, you can buy the plugin. And if it sits on your hard drive, Minsky will find it and it enables those features. If Ravel doesn't exist on the system, it's just normal. So all we've done in terms of the Windows Ravel installer is it just has the Ravel plugin bundled in the installer. And I think there's a couple of cosmetic sort of livery changes, like the logo as it appears on your desktop is different, that sort of thing. But that's all minor. You can run Ravel out of standard Minsky by just getting the plugin and placing it in a directory where Minsky can find it, and then you've got a fully functioning Ravel. So in terms of how we would sell that to another company, it would be, I guess, based on the intellectual property behind Ravel. So there's various patents and so on. There is the source code involved in this proprietary plugin, which of course is proprietary code. And then because Minsky is a GPL license, we would probably need to, and Steve owns the copyright to Minsky, we'd probably need to license Minsky in a full proprietary use fashion to the buyer. That's assuming that they want to do that. They may well have other plans for Ravel. Some of the other things we've done with Ravel, Niels did quite a nice website, which was basically a COVID-19 dashboard, which has Ravel running in the web browser. And that's just Ravel. It's and you can just use it to control the display of the data sets. So there's no Minsky involved in that. So Ravel will run quite separately. We did have some years back an add-on for Microsoft Excel with Ravel, which was going to be our initial go-to-market strategy to do that. We've backed away from that primarily because Microsoft Excel make it very hard to run third-party plugins or third-party. It's the whole issue of everything that's basically got to be a Visual Basic macro, and it doesn't trust third-party Visual Basic macros because too many people have used them to deliver viruses into Microsoft Office. So we just thought it's just not worth it. It's going to confuse too many people. So that's when we pivoted to essentially using Minsky as the Ravel hosting platform.
Right. Where can people get Minsky, and how can they help in the development of Minsky themselves?
Yeah, so there's a number of ways. So the primary place to get hold of Minsky is the minsky.sourceforge.net website. So on SourceForge, we produce installers for Windows and Macintosh, which you can download directly from that and get started pretty quickly if you're on those platforms. If you're on a Linux platform, then I publish packages, binary packages for a number of the most common Linux distributions through the OpenSUSE build system. So there are links from the minsky.sourceforge.net website to that. So that it should be enough for people to get started. If you're then much more hardcore, or if you are running a much more unusual operating system, then you would need to build Minsky from source code. So the source code is available from there, but also from the GitHub website, which is github. I can't, but you can Google it basically.
I'll put the links up in the
put
live
the links
stream.
in.
Yeah.
So yeah, now in terms of getting involved in the Minsky project, how you contribute back, I would say that being an open source project, it's I certainly welcome contributions to people. So if you're used to using GitHub and Git pull requests, there are all sorts of areas you can get involved in. I've had one fellow that's given me contributions towards desktop integration on Linux systems, which I've merged in recently. So it's we're very, very accepting of contributions. So if you're very good on C++, then certainly there's quite a lot of issues to do with the back end. Similarly, if if you're very good in the sort of front-end JavaScript world, particularly we use Angular and TypeScript. These are sorts of technologies which are very popular. That's what the current Minsky front-end is. So you can work on adding front-end features. There's quite a number of areas that could be improved or actual features implemented. Quite often, for adding a new feature, you do need to have a foot in both camps. If there's any particular project you want to get working on, we can work out ways of supporting you in one or other camp to get things happening. Documentation is always an ever-present need. And right now, I think the documentation was more or less up to date to the end of the Minsky 2.x series. But as we've moved into 3.0, some things have kind of changed. Certainly screen snapshots look rather different. And we just haven't had the opportunity to go back and update those areas of the manual. And again, the best way to contribute changes to the manual, which is all written in LaTeX actually, but would be to actually create your changes and then create a pull request at GitHub. And other than that, if your bent is just to basically try out bits of software to take it to the breaking point, we could always do with more beta testers. So join the beta tester mailing list, and I create basically builds of where the current development snapshot is almost every week, maybe a week and a half to 2 weeks in between. And yeah, so I just look for people to just try things out, because I can't test every feature of Minsky every week. There's not enough hours in the day to do that. So I work on something, I can easily break something somewhere completely different. And as much as I have automated regression testing on a lot of the code base, there are just some things you can't regression test, particularly in the user interface interaction. So yeah, the more beta testers as possible, the merrier.
I'll add, there's also a Patreon page for Minsky, patreon.com/HP Coders, I believe.
Something like that, yes.
Yeah, I'll put the link up for that too in the live stream. You can, I guess, for as little as $2 a month, something like that, you can contribute to funding Russ doing this work, and kind of watch Minsky grow yourself. I do the smallest one. I can't remember how much, $2 or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, the point of that, the very lowest tier of funding is more or less to tell us who you are, so that we know who the users are, and you can post questions on Patreon, although ultimately I tend to prefer email as a form of communication. But yeah, no, if people do post occasional questions on Patreon and suggestions, and I will take those. In terms of suggestions, SourceForge, we use the SourceForge ticketing system. So any bugs that you find, please file a bug request or bug report with the SourceForge ticketing system. Feature requests, similarly, you're always welcome to add a feature request, and we'll consider it, and and schedule it if it's a good idea. We'll schedule it to work on at some point when we have time. So that's kind of it.
How big is that feature request list getting, Russell?
It's got of the order of 100 items on it, I think. I sometimes say, like, I've managed to knock 3 things off my to-do list today, but there's another 60 or 70. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I don't do these recordings much for this show because it's a live show, but I was talking to Steve. I'm like, we got to have Russ on. He's Mr. Minsky, essentially, in the background. So I'm glad you were able to kind of give me a little bit of your time. And maybe one day we can get you to stay up late at night and come join the live and talk to all our viewers. The last week, Steve was drinking Jack Daniels. So you want to bring a case of beer with you? You can drink on live. And
it's the late night ones are tough. I do occasional late night meetings, but as you're aware, I think sometimes you've been the one that's done the late night shift, and sometimes it's been me. Well, later on in the year, I haven't actually bought the tickets yet, but we're actually planning on decamping to Europe for a month or 2. So I'll be in a different time zone for probably July, August, September is the current thinking. Might be able to do something then.
Drop me an email if you remember to. And maybe we could make that work. It'd be really cool for you to kind of interact with, all the viewers on the show. A lot of them, quite a few of them use Minsky or have used Minsky, so it'd be neat to see you interact with them. All right, Russ, it was great. Thank you.
All right, and thanks for interviewing, Ty.
Not a problem, buddy.
All right.
Okay, guys, remember to hit the like button. This is a recording, and right after this recording, we're going into Still Friends after the show, so stay tuned.
Well, that was the interview with Russell Standish, the man above Daniel Sanderson. Dan, the man. It is now Russ, the man. That was we had to do that because Russ was in Australia, but we really needed him on the Steve and Friends show. So I'm glad we got to do that. I'm sure some of you have some questions about Minsky. Steve will be on in the after show along with Mike and Dan. We're going to do a little fun part here. I'll do the names this time because I've forced everybody else to do the names. So the names here for the top chatters of last week go like this. We have Lost Adult, Ghost on the Half Shell, TR, Barry Smith, Capricios. Oh boy. Thomas, and I always get Thomas's last name wrong, but I'm going to give it a shot here. Thomas Sergit, Web Freaks, Lenadell, Hates the Clock, El Pinsim, Utilar. Boy, oh boy, if you're watching, I apologize. And then we have Circular economice. I don't know if that's a different foreign type name. We have a few academics on the show. They might be able to correct me later. I would give one more shout out to Recast Studio. You can find them at recast.studio. I do the audiograms for the show midweek, little recaps. These guys provide their service for free. So in exchange, hey, we got to bump them. Check them out. Try them out. Maybe even do a few of them for your social media account. It's pretty cool stuff. We're going to go into the after show now. I don't think I have anything else I can cover here. I can find my intro and outro file and press the play button on it. So that's what I'm going to do right now. We'll see you in 1 minute.
We did it again. Now, as I said, our last show was canceled after you appeared on it. So fingers crossed the executives don't do that again.
The more I read in the neoclassical thing, the more I just, I'm scratching my eyeballs out all the time.
The voice of God in the background.
Oh, geez. Once the coins get warm enough because of your body temperature in the winter, it actually keeps you moderate beer drinking in the evenings. Well, that's inspiring for a Saturday morning.
Still friends after the show. We have the gang here. We have Professor Steve Keen, Daniel Sanderson, and Mike Radzicki. I'm loving this new mic going on here. I've been trying to tweak it up so I could get that smooth Barry White radio voice. I've been listening to a lot of podcasts to try to get that sound right. It is difficult to say the least. I'm going to bring on, well, we got Steve, everybody on the screen. I'll unmute Steve because I'm hoping he watched that on YouTube, and I want to get his opinion on Russ and kind of his side of the story of the development of Minsky. Steve, how you doing?
Yeah, fine. I mean, I couldn't watch it on recast, as you realise. I went across to YouTube and got pretty much 40 minutes of it, I would say. And like Russ's recollection of where we met is quite accurate. The conference I ran was called Commerce, Complexity, and Evolution. And I ran it just because there were three guys in the city of Sydney at the time who were interested in complex systems. Myself, Carl Chiarella, a wonderful twin PhD mathematics and economics, who was a specialist in dynamical systems analysis and did brilliant work, 10-dimensional, predator-prey model systems and things like that. And Robert Marks, who is a multi-agent modeler, that modeled the evolution of the coffee market quite impressively. And he won. There was a winner of the first ever contest of multi-agent games. You've heard of that contest? You'd know about it, wouldn't you, Mike? I think it runs out of Santa Fe Institute. They ran a competition for the most successful competitive game software, multi-agent style, and it was called the tit for tat strategy. And Robert Marks is the one who invented it. So that's Robert. And then a guy called Hermann Schnabel, who was a visitor, seeing from Germany, again, working in complex systems. So I attended the seminar given by Hermann, walked up to him and said, look, I'd like your work. And I knew Carl already. I said, now there's four of us, literally. Now there's four of us in Sydney interested in complex systems. Maybe we should hold a one-day seminar. I put out a bloody email about it, and I got 35 responses, I think, or 40 around the world. 150 people attended the conference ultimately, had a single stream and three 3-day conference, a huge bloody thing. And Russell put in one of the submissions of using his Ecolab software, which is effectively infinite dimensional predator prey model of evolution. And it was fascinating stuff. And he's an extremely friendly guy, as well, as you would have seen from talking with him. So we got to chatting before the conference, then after the conference, and then my wife and his still wife became friends, and then we socialized and all this sort of jazz. So that's the sort of long-term background. He got retrenched. The University of Sydney in New South Wales ran this high-performance computing centre. Did he actually mention this detail to you, Ty? Because I missed the part of the conference.
No.
Okay, yeah. So he was the head of it, and it was like a large, high performance computing, as it sounds, both the software and the hardware. He was running it, and then without warning, they shut it down. So he found himself without a job, and he had to go into commercial programming, and that's where he started what he called high performance computing. So if you search for high performance computing, you'll find Russell's website, doing all sorts of different jobs with different groups at different times. At the moment, he's working with a company called RapidScan about developing a much faster way or automating scanning of luggage going onto aeroplanes and boats and trains and so on. So that's one thing he's working on. But when I got in touch with him, he'd been working with the Roads and Traffic Authority in Australia, building a intelligence system for traffic light control. And then that got shut down. And I happened to write to him when I first got the grant. And I was like this, I wrote to him saying, I've just got a grant from Minet to build this thing called Minsky. Do you know anybody who could code it for me? Praying he would say me. And that's what he did. He said, well, actually, yes, me, I could do it. So, there was a choice that was either that or getting, thanks for that, Niels. And by the way, been a pleasure working with you too, by the way. I saw that earlier comment. Niels, we'll talk about Niels in a moment if you like. I'm getting rambling far too much here. Anyway, so we're coding it together. Then he got in retrenched, which started his commercial life. Western Sydney, with the wonderfully progressive University of Western Sydney, Vice Chancellor, decided to abolish the economics department, made all 5 professors of economics redundant, including me. And at that point, I thought, well, I've got this idea, as Russell mentioned, I came up with the idea of Ravel as an interface for a data analytic hypercube database. I thought, I've got the idea. UW certainly can't claim they invented it. I dreamt up before them. Now I'm leaving them. Let's do it commercially. So for a while, I was using my retirement money to fund Russell half time. So he was charging me half his daily hourly rate, and we were doing a 50-50 on Ravel. And it's now got to the point where it's potentially a serious competitor in the business intelligence market. So that's our long story.
Right. So that's interesting. We're going to talk about Niels here in a second. Ghost on the half shelf. I've adjusted my my interface. I've got a clever new virtual preamp for this mic. Yeah, I'm gonna unmute both Dan and Mike. How is my audio right now? Am I distorted in any way?
Nope.
No, you're good.
Okay, and Ghost on the half shelf, how is it now? Is it better? I simply turned down the input. I didn't change any of the EQ. Let me know in the chat. I'll get Steve, let's follow up with Niels. How is he fitting in the project right now?
Well, Niels was the one who came up with the idea of a COVID dashboard. And I don't know how, Niels, you pop us a little note as to how you found out about Ravel, because I know Niels has been a supporter of mine on Patreon virtually from the outset. So he's, again, somebody like all of us here interested in non-orthodox economics, and he should be one of the friends come on board this little show as well at some point. But anyway, he knew Minsky, he knew my work, and maybe I've talked about Ravel and Patreon, I really can't be sure. And then I suggested that we should have a database showing what Ravel can do with COVID. And I think actually Nils had already started that himself anyway. So he'd taken the basic, just a way to describe Ravel to anybody who hasn't seen it yet. If you know the idea of 6 degrees of freedom for somebody moving in space, you can go up or down, forward or backward, left or right. Okay, so you've got six arrows. Imagine those 6 arrows. That's what a Ravel is. But you can rotate the arrows independently. You can collapse an arrow, which does various forms of aggregation. You can take a segment, which gives you a range of data. You can take a particular data point, so you isolate an individual data set in this hypercube. So that's the idea. And Niels could see the potential, and put together this Ravel database to how does it pivot table? Like effing steroids, mate. Pivot table. Mike, if you use pivot tables, look, you're nodding your head in grim agreement there.
Yeah, I
You have.
from
What
time
do you
to
think of
time.
it?
Yeah, in Excel, sure. Yeah.
They're complicated. They're clunky. Every time you want a different view, you've got to design a different pivot table. Um, people, it's one of those dividing walls in software, because they exist in Excel, of course. And if you're a normal Excel user, I'm being mirrored here, so I'll do it this way. You hit the wall and that's it. You bounce off it. You try it once. Oh, that was hard. You don't go back to it again. So 90% of users in Excel never use pivot tables. Some people crack through at the top and think, hey, I can make a career out of this. This is really difficult. I can become the pivot table expert for a major corporation, and I'm an easy street, Well, Ravel says, we're going to get you right over that hill. Okay. So that's the whole idea of Ravel. Once you see it, you can't forget it. Once you've manipulated it, it's easy to remember how to use it again. And it really is a case of us fine tuning the appearance of it and some of the functionality. And I think it could expand. Sound as fun as a career in COBOL. That's about a pivot table. I think COBOL's actually probably more exciting. But with Ravel, anybody who uses it will think, oh, that's a good idea. I'll use it again. And we think we could expand quite seriously. We could expand the pivot table market by a factor of 10. Now, the dominant program that uses pivot tables is not Excel, it's Tableau. And Tableau, strangely enough, Mike, I only had 80,000 users when it was purchased by Salesforce for, I think it was 18 or $17.9 billion. Now, those 50,000 or 80,000 customers include a lot of major corporations with thousands of site licenses, of course. Yeah, it's like DB views. It's actually, if you've used Power BI in Microsoft, that's also based on pivot tables. So we've got nothing like the user base. Obviously, we've got 0 users right now, apart from beta testers like yourself and so on. But we think we could expand the market by a factor of 10 over what Excel and Tableau and Power BI actually have, and that makes it worth a lot of money, which if we got sold the IT would finance a lot of tweaks for Minsky.
Right. I want to get Dan's opinion, because I know Dan, I may have talked to Russell once before, but I want to kind of get his opinion on the 3-minute talk there. Did he gain value on what system or what Minsky is and what system dynamics is? And if there are any lingering questions he may have that we could address now that may help address some of the questions the viewers have.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the interview was good. It felt a little slow at times, which was fine. Russell, no, I mean, look, I mean, I'm just kind of
Thanks, Dan.
No. Okay, I'll dig myself a hole. But no, Russell. I mean, I know he's been really important to the Steve Minsky relationship, and it's just been absolutely integral. And it was very interesting to see him explain the software from the developer standpoint. I had this wish that there would be an ongoing call to action that was effective and scalable within the community to have the open source improved, as is already happening on kind of small contributions here and there. But of course, my mind is going to, well, how do we scale that? How do we bring in more people? How do we get the community engaged? And that's what I found myself thinking of as he was explaining the software itself. And maybe we can talk about that. How do we get how do we grow it organically rather than waiting for that $1 million prize, right? I mean, assuming that the payout won't happen, assuming that we're not going to get an infusion of cash, what's plan B? That's what I was thinking of.
Right. And that's a good question. I think we'll bring Mike in here to kind of expand that a bit. I want to say you are sounding really good today. Do you have some sort of stereo effect going on?
Me?
Yeah, you.
Well, no, I turned the heater off because last week Ty says to me, he goes, "It sounds like you got a heater running in the background." I'm like, I do. It's right there. So,
Oh, yeah.
So it's just the silky voice of climate and correlations.
Climate and correlations
with Professor Steve Keen and friends.
Don't forget post Keynesian economist. You got to put that emphasis. Mike, kind of give me your thoughts on the talk with Russell Standish.
Well, it reminded me of the many conversations I've had over the last 40 years with system dynamics software developers, ranging from, Jack Pugh and Dynamo, and John Uran and Bill Davidson with NDTran, and Barry Richmond with Stella, and Bob Eberlein and Dave Peterson with Vensim. There's always competition for time. You're either fixing bugs and or trying to prioritize new features, because everybody's asking you, can you make it do this? Can you make it do that? And you got to prioritize it and work on new features as well. There's never enough hours in the day. There's never enough resources. But if you start adding, 55 programmers, now you got a whole bunch of chefs trying to stir the pot, and then there's all sorts of issues there. So it's kind of the standard story. And I would say beyond system dynamics software development, it's probably any software development. And I'm going to guess the people who do software development for a living have techniques, to manage this process. But so it's kind of to my ear, it was the standard story. And it's nice to hear sort of the history of these things. I can tell you in the field of system dynamics, as far as I know, and this was always said to me as well, I'm not an accountant that delved into anybody's books, but I was always told that no system dynamics company ever made money from system dynamics software sales. At best, they'd break even, but it was a marketing tool to get them consulting jobs. So anybody who said, I got an idea, I'm going to make a better SD package and make my money being a software company, quickly found out that was a really, a tough way to run the railroad. So they ended up becoming a consulting company and building models using their software. So
that is actually, that's actually makes a lot of sense, because when I look at the software, I mean, one of the reasons I designed Minsky the way I did was I thought that the front ends for all those software packages were incredibly dated, really old-fashioned, and cumbersome in such ways as, for example, MATLAB makes money, but MATLAB makes money out of its mathematical side, not out of Simulink too. That's right. That is a good point, actually. So from Lost Adult, the only software packages in the system dynamics space that actually make substantial amounts of money are Simulink. Is Simulink, which is an extension to MATLAB, and it's used in the engineering community. Everything you use in engineering, from microchips to 747s, Simulink is part of the design process. So that's the money maker. But all the ones in social science, and that's Vensim, Stella, I think, etc., etc. They're very clunky, and like the front end of those is like I forgot which one it was. Probably I think it's Stella. when you bring up an object which you know contains an equation, the first thing you get is a window that helps you set the fonts up. What font would you like this to be? How large? Italic? Bold? Who gives a fuck was my thing. I want to see the equation. You've got to click on an equation tab and bring up the equation. And then it's a text string. It's exactly what you type as a programmer. If you want to have the x to the power of y, you'd have x asterisk asterisk y, which is exactly what a coder would write in C++ or things like that. I just thought it just didn't appeal to me at all. So because I'm not trying to make money out of it or be a consultant at the time, was as an academic, I borrowed the best that I could from both mathematical programs like MathCAD, where you actually set the equations on screen, and VenSim, not VenSim, but VisSim, which was a competitor to Simulink in the engineering space, with a beautiful interface design, but unfortunately it lost out. Now it's just a minority thing in traffic control. Yeah, if you look at the conventional stuff, the Stellars and so on, and they're very old-fashioned and very clunky. And if you're making money out of it, you do what's called a refactor. You redesign the whole thing. But if you're not making money out of it, why bother? And that seems to be why they've been so slow in developing over time.
Yeah, yeah, and just to give some stats out there, just to kind of relate it to the average person, if you look at the YouTube channel of MATLAB, they have about 250,000 subscribers, and if you look at Stella
Wow.
and Vincim, they have less subscribers than my personal YouTube channel. So they are a successful outfit in that regard. I will add, Stella seems to be a lot better with their interface now. They might even have a leading type interface for the social systems type system dynamic programs versus VinSim, which, geez, seems like it was made in the 1980s. Daniel, you had a question. I want you to ask it.
Yeah, this question is for Steve. I want to take you back to those years where you were a software reviewer, I guess Russell had mentioned way back in the day. And I want you to think of philosophical first principles. So, first principles, I want you to do a comparison between SQL and the programming language that I believe you envisioned and that is in the programming language of Minsky. Is there a difference, and is there a limitation that you see with SQL being an industry norm sort of thing?
Like they tell you what, I can trash SQL till the cows come home. I noticed Ghost on the Shell as a SQL, MySQL user. I regard SQL as the Esperanto of languages. It's the language which everybody can speak and nobody uses because it's too damn boring. So SQL works on the idea if you have multiple two-dimensional tables where the columns are the fields and the rows, the records are the rows. And then if you want to link them together, you have to make a join between two tables. So if you have customers buying products from a shop, then you have customer, and then you have buy, which is then it links each customer name to each product they buy. So if you have if a customer buys five items when going shopping with you, there'll be 5 entries in the join database. And then you've got to make a join to come it all together. That's treating data as two-dimensional when it's not. So my favorite database language is actually a language called PIC, which stands, I've forgotten the guy's name, but he was a businessman. And he thought, look, I want a database that matches my forms. So a PIC database will have what he called multi-dimensional fields. And you'll have one record for the customers, you have a number for the customer's data comes across from the customer file. Then you have a product number, and if you have a product number, you bring all the product information across, and that's going to be the product number going to be a multi-valued field. So if you bought product 1, 7, 13, 29, and 88, it would then bring across those records, including their prices, times the quantity. So the form itself would be just like you'd fill out on paper, and it actually matched the database as well. But that also meant you had to make all sorts of innovations in how you search the data. So you could no longer index by a fixed field length. With SQL databases, each row is a particular fixed length, and there's a certain number of fields, you do a mathematical calculation. You want the 97th record, it's 97 times the byte size plus 1, and bang, you'll get down to there. And your indexing is quite rigid as well. But with the big database, you had to use the hash table. You had to make a way to take, yes. Anyway, I could go on forever about this. But all of this stuff, what I realized, and this is actually probably a more general point, I was lucky to be a software reviewer during what I would call the Cambrian explosion period in the evolution of software. Okay? An incredible range of different programs. Microsoft has turned into a fucking monoculture. Okay? And everybody uses, so it's like in the database world, I literally reviewed, when I was doing software reviews, 65 different database programs. Okay? About 5 of them exist now, and they're all minorities, except for Microsoft Access, which everybody gets for free and nobody uses. Now, when Access came along, it trashed the entire industry. All the other ones died. Oh, I don't need to buy your relation. I get one for Microsoft. Well, nobody uses it. It's a shitty bloody program. And therefore, people use Excel for a database, which is a total disaster. Breaks all the rules of databases. So Mike wants to come in here. Take over, mate. Tag team.
Thanks, Steve. So I just wanted to say a few words about where I see the dynamic software world heading. Because during the interview, agent-based modeling was mentioned and as a part of it, and I think it's multi-method modeling. And overwhelmingly, the leader right now is AnyLogic. And I can remember at the System Dynamics conference, Andrei Borshev would sit at a little table, basically pleading with you to just take a free copy of his software to take a look at it. And, please adopt it, or would you please, and now you pay an arm and a leg if you want his software. It's grown by leaps and bounds on the YouTube channel. He's got almost 1.4 million views on his YouTube channel. And you can use AnyLogic to build agent-based models, discrete event models, system dynamics models, or combinations of them. So, for example, you could have an agent-based model where each agent has a system dynamics model in its virtual head. That is its virtual representation of what it thinks the system is, that sort of stuff. And so not a lot of work has been done quite yet in how to do that in a teachable, repeatable way. But there's a huge opening there. They also have a lot of libraries. So if you want to bring in, a Google map and then have little cars driving on it, literally on the roads on the Google map, easy to do. Little ships going into harbors. If you want it to go into Pearl Harbor or something like that, Antwerp, whatever, you can make it do that. So it's really a powerful software. You can, if you want to build a model of a particular airport, you can make the terminals and the runways so it looks exactly like Logan Airport or JFK or whatever, and have planes landing. So I think that's where Andrei was really smart. Now there's 2 drawbacks to what he is up to. One is hard to overcome. The other is not. I think the first one, he's Russian. So try to get the U.S. government, the U.S. military, any NATO nation government, big users of this sort of stuff, to put it on their machines. It's from Russia. Forget about it. The second one is to make it do most things, you got to write Java script. And that's like, well, I don't know Java, so how am I going to do it? Well, now they're working on using Chat GPT with AnyLogic to help you write the Java for what you want to do. So these guys, the grass does not grow under their feet. They are a powerhouse. And I think the multi-method stuff is where all of this is ultimately heading. I could be wrong. I'm just making an educated guess.
I'll let Steve have. I'll let Steve have the last word on this, and then we're going to move on to another topic. So go ahead, Steve.
I have to agree with Mike here. AnyLogic is a cut above anything, including Minsky, in the multi-agent space. If I had wanted, the reason for going for Minsky is open source, and that was actually required by INET, and I'm pleased about that. It means students can use it. AnyLogic is there's now an arm and a leg to get a copy of it, but it is by far the most sophisticated program in the product space, and it enables you to it's the ultimate modeling software package. And Minsky, if I got a fortune, And now if I sold Ravel for a bomb, then I'd be okay. Let's see if we can do everything you can do in any logic that it did target. But at the moment, that is so far beyond what I've got funding for. And that's one reason to go for commercial software rather than open source, because commercial software by definition gets money for development. Whereas Minsky, Russell's had that Patreon page going for 2 or 3 years. He gets $500 a month for it. 100 and something people signing up for it. So it's trivial. So if you want to be get serious development done, then you need the sort of both the smarts that went into AnyLogic in the first instance, and you've got to take your hat off to the concept designing there, or AnyLogic. I got a brilliant idea. Procedural programming language, multi-agent, system dynamics, and now they're bringing in their own programming language as well. It's top class. So that's something which Minsky will, if I like to make a bomb out of Ravel, Minsky will be a competitor, and for free as well. But I've got to sell Ravel first.
Yes. So everybody, make sure you're downloading the beta versions of Minsky, trying it out, getting the word out there, posting your models on social media. Let's get Minsky to a wider audience. I'm going to switch gears here, but first I've got to do some housekeeping. You need to hit the like button. That is a requirement. If you're not, here's the thing. I'm looking at the viewers at Twitter here and on YouTube. If you don't hit the like button, you got to leave. So this is it. We either shut the show down or you hit the like button. So make sure you're hitting the like button. Make sure if you haven't subscribed to the Professor Steve Keen channel, subscribe, because he not only does these live streams on his channel, he's often putting out lectures on how to use Minsky, economic theory. So make sure you're subscribing. If you're on Twitter right now, please retweet it so we get it out to more people, and then come over here and chat. I'm going to switch the topic to the Reserve Bank of Australia. Seems to be some word out there that they are changing the structure of how it works to, I think, better to be more similar to the Bank of England. I'm going to let Steve kind of start on that, just because he's an Australian and it's the Steve Keen show. Tell me your thoughts on it. I know it comes down to independence of the central bank. Let's talk about it, Steve.
It's the obvious point of the review was that everything works better if you put economists in charge. Okay. And especially if they're mainstream economists. So that's what they've done. So they said, rather than having business people on the committee, we need to have conventional economists on the committee instead, making the decisions. They shouldn't be. In the past, it was possible for the treasurer to overrule them. Can't have politics ruling economics. What do the politicians know? The economists are the experts. So now what we've got is the monetary policy being done by a committee of 8 economists, no business people. They can't be overruled by the treasurer. So whatever they do in terms of interest rates, that they're stuck with it. You can't say that's just a wrong decision from our point of view. And I've seen them heralding this is going to be the greatest revolution in economics ever. Now, I've just had a quick look at the document. That was Chicago school. Forget those Austrians. Austrians can't handle mathematics. We can do difference equations. We're really sophisticated. Yeah, fuck them. Anyway, so that's what the bloody report has done. And finally, I just had a quick look at the document. I don't want to waste my time reading this shit, frankly. But I had a fast look at it, and they said they chose 3 important economic events in recent history. Guess which one was not included?
What?
The global financial crisis. Okay. They left that out. Okay. I wonder why. You got to get Mike swearing as well. So anyway, so they did typical wank economists. We got everything working properly. So the delusional monkeys are taking over the asylum.
Interesting. I think I'll swing it over to Daniel, and for Daniel, I'll ask, what do you think about the central bank being independent from the government. So you have a central bank in every country, Dan, you know that, the Fed down in the States, up here in Canada, the Bank of Canada, Australia, the Reserve Bank of Australia. There's always been a sense of independence between monetary policy and physical policy. What do you think about that separation? And in Australia's case, it sounds like they're trying to separate it more. What's your opinion from a layman, armchair economist perspective?
Well, I'll default to the to probably the biggest economy in the world, which I think would be something that Mike can follow up on, which would be the United States. I just remember that the Fed announcing interest rate increases and or changes to interest rates was just, it just had the markets waiting, right? And so it seemed to me to be something that was authoritative and really drove the markets. And I don't know, I felt, as a layman, I felt that there was some comfort in that, in a monetary policy or changes in interest rates being, I guess, dictated or by the central bank, right? And I think that's where my layman understanding comes from. What do you have to say, Mike?
Well, I don't know, a couple of thoughts that leap to mind. Number one is, at least in the United States, I know that historically at the Fed, there was a conflict between the people who came to the central bank from banking and those who came from PhD programs in economics. Like, who should be running the place, and who should be, the intellectual, setting the intellectual course of the institution. And they don't think alike. People who are bankers will look at some of the econ stuff and go, shake their head and go like, you guys don't understand how a bank works. So there's always been that conflict. Now, of course, Jerome Powell is a lawyer. So there's that, right? But that's been a historical thing. Do we want PhD economists in charge, or do we want bankers in charge? Are central banks independent? Allegedly, they are. Supposedly, at least in the United States, if they're insulated from politics, they can go in a room and pull the shades and lock the doors and decide on interest rate policy, and nobody's allowed in. The politicians aren't doing anything, whatever. That's nonsense. The Treasury, who conducts fiscal policy from the politicians, and the central bank are intertwined. The central bank is reactive. When the Treasury is doing whatever it's doing based on whatever the politicians are doing, it's reacting, right? It'll have interest rate targets if it's a sovereign nation, a sovereign fiat currency, but it's reacting to what's going on. So the idea that they're independent of one another is ridiculous.
Interesting. What do you say? What do you think is the best solution, and what does that person or group look like, and what kind? Is it from a diverse background, some banking sector, some business sector? I mean, what are your thoughts on that ideal group? Yeah.
Yes, so I believe the big problem is economic ignorance. That economists are trained a certain way, and it's path dependent. There's a story, a narrative, and they follow it, and that's how their bread is buttered. Deviate from that, you get slapped around. Forget about those guys. You got to get to the business community and the public, and you got to educate them. You got to have Minsky models that are out there. The Minsky software is free. You got to have games that are engaging and fun, and people are learning about this stuff. How does a fiat currency system work? What the heck? You can't, it's not backed by gold. The James Bond movie and the Goldfinger thing, that's not how it works. I'd venture a guess there's no gold whatsoever in Fort Knox, and it doesn't matter. But people don't know. And the politicians, they either don't know or they know, and they're afraid to speak up because the results are so counterintuitive that they fear not being reelected, because it's the old fallacy of composition. You got to balance your budget at your house. I got to balance my budget at my house. The damn federal government better balance its budget. Well, it doesn't have to, but they can't make the leap. They're not educated.
My man upstairs.
It's a real problem. Yeah, it's a real problem because we got a bunch of people in charge of monetary policy who don't understand money, and it is just embarrassing to watch what they do. And they continue to resist learning about the real world. And it's incredibly frustrating, for particularly a character like myself and Mike are getting on these days. We've had decades of watching these morons fuck up the system that they don't understand, you know? And, particularly from my point of view, knowing a financial crisis is coming because of the dynamics of credit that I understood because of Minsky, that I modeled mathematically because of Minsky. And I can see this, you guys are walking straight into a bloody brick wall. You're dragging it along with you. You're going to cause a crisis. And I got laughed at, and then bang, I hit the bloody wall. On the other side, they shook their heads for a while, and they consider, oh, what else can we drive in? Well, that's the only vehicle. Let's hop back in it again. They're back doing dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models again without money in them. And like, ironically, I've got a few mates who are neoclassical economists. One of them worked at the Bank of England, and he's the only guy who actually understands money. And he's now finding that he's going along and presents DSGE models, and he's a top class model in that technology with banks, and he gets ridiculed the same way I did. So, they won't accept that banks credit and debt matter. They won't put it into their bloody models, even when somebody showed them how to do it. They don't like the results it gives, and they're still in charge of monetary policy.
How does an economist or peers of economists ridicule you? What do they just ignore? They don't engage? What's the
90% don't engage. 10% is laugh at us, particularly me, because I'm one of the most aggressive around there. Mike's copped a fair bit of it as well. What are these silly wires? They're rubbish here about elements of the interface that they have no fucking understanding of. And like, I had a fight with a guy called Noah Smith, Noah Opinion on Twitter, and he sent a tweet at about 2013, I think, saying, said, should I rubbish Keen's Minsky software? Good, yes, no, not worth it. And I wrote back, I said, any neoclassical taking on system dynamics has got to fight with me, Noah. And then on he goes, and he finally said, oh, well, tell me, what do the wires do? Literally, inverted commas, wires. And he then thought that the wires caused, I love this shows what he knows about software. The wires caused a time delay for signals to go through from one element to another. Therefore, the cycles I were getting were coming out of lags introduced by the technology. And I sort of said, oh, for Christ's sake, can you first of all read Richard Goodwin, 1967, A Growth Cycle, to see where the models come from. Learn a little bit of differential equations and phase differences between systems, Holy shit. And yet what the wires do, they're equal signs, Noah. Like, this is the sort of ridiculing you get. You get ridiculed by people who don't know what the fuck they're ridiculing. And that's why it's so doubly, triply, quadruply frustrating for a character like me and Mike to have to put up with this nonsense.
This just in, message from Ty Keynes. Fuck you, Noah. Mike.
Yeah, Mike.
Mike, you better come in because I'm going to start swearing.
Yeah, just a little anecdote from my personal experience. Years ago, I was invited to give a talk at the University of Chicago's economics department at one of their workshops. And at the time, chaos theory was a big deal. So I had built a little model of a company in system dynamics that under certain circumstances would have a damped oscillation when you'd shock it out of equilibrium. But depending on how you set it up, it could period double and even go chaotic. So I presented this at one of their workshops. And when I was finished, the head guy, who was not a Nobel Prize winner at the time, but he is one now, stood up and said, am I to understand that your model does not have a single unique stable equilibrium? And I said, that is correct. And he said, well, then what I think you've done is very interesting, but it's not economics. And he sat down.
You wonder why we swear.
He was polite, and we had drinks afterwards and all that. So he wasn't like saying, "Oh, you're an idiot" or anything like. But I mean, he had the room. He went on to win a Nobel Prize, and who was I? So interesting, but it's not economic. Let's go have coffee.
I take it he's a recent winner. Is that correct, Mike? A very recent winner?
Lars Peter Hansen.
Okay,
So several years ago.
Yeah. Oh, several. Okay, right.
Very nice man. Very nice man. He was not mean or anything, but he was just being. That was his impression. Rational expectations guy.
Yeah. This is just where they are. They're in their own little bubble. The trouble is the bubble dominates the entire profession, and people outside the bubble think that they're professionals, but they're amateurs in technical terms, in terms of proper modelling, understanding of history of economic thought as well, knowledge of the physical economy. They're bloody amateurs, and that's why I prefer to call them toll-make economists these days. Okay, if there's any school of thought which they're comparable to, it's the Claudius Ptolemy's Earth-centric crystalline spheres, epicycles, equants, and blah, blah, blah model of the solar system. That's what they're really like. Jamie, by the way, Jamie's a great bloke. He's talking to Jamie Galbraith. He's a good friend. And I like what he does in terms of institutional writing and also his work on inequality, where he developed what's called the Thiel Index. So he's done a lot of very good technical work, which most people aren't aware of. I've been a lovely guy all around.
The Thiel Index, like, you mean as in Peter Thiel?
No, just a coincidence, and it's I've forgotten how it's actually designed, but it's a better way to show inequality. And he can actually show inequality down to the county level in America using this
Explain
index.
That. Inequality to show inequality. What in how so, Steve?
Well, you have what's called a Gini coefficient, which is a way of measuring at the aggregate level the inequality that applies in a nation. So if you had this has a percentage of population on the horizontal axis, amount of percentage of wealth on the vertical. So if you have a straight line, you've got a perfectly equal society. Okay, what you normally have is a curve. So you'll find at the bottom, if you mentioned a couple of points on the curve, 0, 0, of course, it starts from 0, 0 and ends at 1, 1. But you might go out to the 0.9, which is 90% of the population, has 10% of the income. Okay, and then 10%, the top 10% has 90%. So that's an unequal society. But that's at the aggregate level for an overall economy, and that's what you normally get. The sort of data he has worked out a way out of regional economic statistics to to measure inequality right down to the county level in America. He's not restricted just at the national level. So he can show inequality within New York, inequality within Milwaukee, and then he can compare inequality in Milwaukee to inequality in New York. So very sophisticated work.
I'm going to need a volunteer, one of you three fine individuals. I did it earlier and butchered it badly. And that would be reading the list of our top chatters from last week, because we always got to pay homage to those guys right there.
Yeah.
So who's it going to be?
I'll do it.
Oh, Dan, you volunteered. Okay, Dan.
Yeah, well, I got to redeem myself, and I think I can clarify a couple of the mispronunciations.
Okay, let me set it. Let me set it up, Dan. Dan is about to redeem himself with the top chatter list from last week. Here we go.
All right, we've got Lost Adult. We've got Ghost on a Half Shell, TR, Barry Smith, Capricious, Thomas Surjed, Web Freaks, Lanadell, Hates the Clock, Alpinism, Utilitar, and Circuli Economists.
That was pretty good there, Daniel. It was really good. You've redeemed yourself.
Yeah,
now,
okay, right.
now Steve did really well there. I believe it was
he's
last
great.
week. Yeah, that's I think
It's like he's a lecturer or something, or he's got like a natural speaking ability. He can just kind of like just slip into it at any time, right? It's amazing.
I can talk I can talk under wet cement. I probably could have got a word in edgeways underneath the SpaceX rocket mount as the 31 engines blew the shit out of the ground below. I would have still been talking under the concrete.
Yeah.
Oh, the SpaceX. We better put this up and give him credit too. Make sure you you retweet and like the show if you're watching on Twitter. Steve, do we have any final thoughts for this week? What's gone on in the world? Anything you want to comment on? What do you want to talk about?
Oh, well, actually, one thing I've missed out on going today was Earth Day. There was a big demonstration in Parliament House by Extinction Rebellion that I wish I'd been part of, but I was, for circumstantial reasons, I wasn't. That, I think, is an effective form of protest. They found a way of demonstrating without, destroying artworks or disrupting public transport. It's actually quite an effective demo. So I hope there's a bit of sophistication coming into XR's campaigning, and therefore more power to them in terms of moving the needle. Not much else to report. I'm still working on the work for climate change for carbon tracker. So I'm hoping that'll come out in about a month or so's time. So we could have some fireworks soon on that front, which I'd very much like to help cause.
Right. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah.
Well, I thought I would share a story with everyone that, with respect to modeling, a little bit of sustainability that you might find interesting. So back when Jimmy Carter was president of the United States, he had hired a guy by the name of Jerry Barney, who was a physicist by training, to head up, I don't know what the name of it, but an Office of Sustainability. And they put together the Global 2000 report to the president. Of course, this is in the 1970s. But it was beginning to look at sustainable development, right? And what's the agenda for the 21st century, whatever. And when Carter left office, Reagan took over, Jerry Barney wanted to continue working in that space rather than going back to being a physicist, I guess. And so he started an organization called the Millennium Institute. And he selected system dynamics as the tool for the Millennium Institute. And he and some people built a very large scale macroeconomic model of a developing nation. And to this day, they go around the world tuning that model up to this country or that country, running scenarios and what have you. And Jerry spent a lot of time trying to get the World Bank to use the model. And the World Bank would say, well, we have our own model, but thanks, and what have you. And then Jerry was persistent and he said, well, can I see your model? It's called RimSim X, or RimSim Extended. And it's a giant Excel model.
No.
I haven't seen it recently, so this is a little bit dated, but I'm going to guess it's still there. But at any rate, and it was worked on by lots and lots of people over many years, and it had layers and layers and layers. And Jerry finally said, "Would you give us a copy? Can we take a look and maybe compare it to what the Threshold 21 can do?" And they finally said, "Yeah, you can have a copy." So Jerry hired a doctoral student from one of the system dynamics programs and said, can you figure out what the hell is going on with RimSim X, this giant Excel model? And so the guy said, well, his name was Mohammed Mostahadasada, I think is how you pronounce his last name. He's an Iranian guy. And he started just trying to map it out or something. Finally, he said, I'm going to try and convert this thing into its equivalent system dynamics representation. And he found it was really hard to do manually. So he wrote software that can suck in an Excel model and spit it out at its equivalent system dynamics representation, in VenSim at the time. And what they found was that a lot of the stuff that was in the documentation, like RimSim does this or that, they're like, no, it doesn't. There's no linkage at all between this and that, and because it's such a, with spreadsheets, they're trying to figure out what the heck is going on. It's hard, right? But you could see it much better with the system dynamics representation. So he actually tried to commercialize the software and go into business and say, show me your spreadsheets that you all love. Let me spit it out as an SD model. Let me make it better for you using this tool. But that goes to show you that, sometimes these, and by the way, RimSim X, lots of dollars go around the globe based on simulations of that thing, right? So, but you don't even necessarily know what's in it, particularly if lots of different people work on it and whatever. So it's you use your software of your choice at your peril sometimes.
Well, like Ty said, he goes, it just works. Like with the with Minsky and with the godly tables, it works. It instantly works.
The whole thing is about visualization. So you can see every last equation in Minsky, and you can see it three ways. Okay, you've got the equations there as the flow chart on screen. You can look at the tables, and the tables will tell you what the flows are as well. We have an equations tab which generates the actual equations in LaTeX for export. And then we've got the variables tab, which Niels has just done some beautiful work on just recently. So then the variables tab tells you the definitions and shows those definitions as actual mathematical equation would be written on paper. So all this stuff means that it's at complete transparency, whereas Excel bloody formulas, holy shit, And of course, as you say, what normally happens is, I'm not joking, I've been told this by senior people in major banks, okay? What would happen for 90% of these companies, this is why you get such total disasters when financial crises happen. They'll get some unpaid intern student to tap an Excel spreadsheet together because being a young kid, they've got to be a bit of gung-ho on software. And they want something left from it that they can understand. So they want it in Excel rather than Python or R or blah, blah, blah. Okay. And they'll put this thing together and it sort of hatches together and they sort of have an understanding of how it works. And then another intern will come and add a bit more and so on. And you finally end up with a total bloody nightmare. Okay. Too many cooks spoiling the broth in a lousy kitchen with bad utensils and unhygienic processes. And that's on that world we stand.
That's right.
Right. I've got a question here. I'm going to address it first because Joe, you ask it, I don't know, like every episode, and I'll give my opinion first, and then maybe let Steve, Mike, and Dan answer. And it's the idea of having central bank money. So you have an account at the central bank. And I had a video conversation yesterday with an economist from Pakistan, a lot less developed economy. And that was one of the questions he was asking me. We were talking about Minsky modeling. In a place like Canada, I think you're from Canada, Joe. I think it would be very hard to implement because we have a huge financial market here and forces that would be very adverse to starting something like that. Banks make profits and they make huge profits. They employ a lot of people in our economy. For me, for an ethical reason, I believe money should be treated like healthcare in Canada, and I'm just speaking from a Canadian perspective. And we should just have accounts at the central bank. We can still have branches that are owned by the central bank with loan officers that decide, is your business worthy of a loan or it's not worthy of a loan, and still have the money creation process. But the problem is we have a social class that is financial, and I just don't see it happening in a country like Canada or the United States. But when I was talking to this economist from Pakistan, I thought, you know what? This would be a perfect economy to try to implement something like that early on in its economic development relative to the development of the United States, the UK, Canada, etc. So I think in practicality, it could work in a small developing economy, but I think we need capitalism to absolutely fall apart, crash, have an ecological disaster, and then maybe we get our heads out of our asses and say, hey, money is important enough that it should be managed by a central authority. Because at this point in our societies, money is above religion. And that might hurt some religious people out there, but the bottom line, our new modern religion is money. So, Steve, kind of maybe let's hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah, like I agree. I was actually in one of my podcasts coming up with Phil Dobbie on the Debunking Economics podcast is discussing central bank digital currencies. And as it happened in that conversation, I focused more on the crazy reasons why central banks first wanted to do this. Because if you go back to when the inflation rate was below 2%, they thought, oh, we need to get negative rates in bank accounts to encourage people to spend. Or, if you don't spend your money, you lose money. So get your money out there and spend. effectively a form of gazillion currency. They wouldn't have been aware of that themselves. And they wanted to abolish cash. Okay? You either have money in a private bank account or a central bank account, and that's it. And like, I don't want people that don't understand money abolishing cash. So that may be anti-CBDCs for that reason. But fundamentally, I agree. We now have, with electronic systems, you don't have to have physical branches. ATMs have virtually died anyway, for the other end of it, in terms of holding cash. You could have a central bank money system, so cutting out the private bank layer. And given what the product have done, and Lana, I very much enjoyed seeing your comment earlier about how much you absolutely hate the practices in banking. I'm not for a cashless society either. I agree. I want to have a cash-based society too. But I would like, it'd be quite feasible to have cash or to have central bank digital currencies on an electronic front and not have a private banking system. And that would be it could be quite a functional system, because the private banks have added very little of quality in the last 30 or 40 years. They've added mainly schemes.
Let's get Mike's thoughts on it.
I think it's a wonderful question. It's beginning to be asked by a variety of people, and it's a wonderful, Minsky modeling, system dynamics modeling problem to explore the dynamics of going to such a system. I agree with Ty. There's no way the banking lobby, the shareholders of bank stocks, Jamie Dimon, and all the big bankers, the rentier class, is going to allow themselves to be, disposed of, even though what did Keynes talk about, the euthanizing the rentier class or whatever. So, cutting them out, I just don't see it realistically happening. Certainly not, let's say, in the United States, or you mentioned Canada. And one other point, we're doing a little bit of work now in Ghana, some of our students, and it's funny, the financial system over there is primarily susus, which are microfinancing groups in all the villages. And so the central bank can be doing whatever the hell it wants, and it only impacts like 30% of the economy, because everything runs according to these village susus. So you can't just impose one model elsewhere. You got to see what the heck is going on in the particular economy and act accordingly.
Right. I guess I'll end it here with Dan's thoughts on it. How do you feel if the option was there that you could just have a bank account with the Bank of Canada and do away with TD, CIBC, et cetera, et cetera? Your thoughts?
I take that one step further, and I propose that the government of Canada should have and this goes for every country around the world, should have an open standing order to hire any citizen that's willing to stay within within a particular carbon limit, and offer cash incentives for the growth of organizations and organizational behavior that encourage that type of thing, so that you're leveraging what the market can do, and then hope for an emergent phenomenon. But I think we need to incent the general public at an agent-based level, and let democracy prevail.
So I assume that all operates under having an account at the central bank to encourage people to take up that practice.
Actually, I mean, I think Steve has mentioned that that's one particular way. I don't know if that's not a necessity to the system, to have the central bank currency. I think currency functions very well as it is. I don't think it's necessary, but I could be convinced otherwise. Yeah.
Private debt levels 2008.
Oh, you want me to
Yeah.
Steve, say something, Steve, on that, because that's my counter to Dan, that the banking sector does create some problems that would be addressed by having a more responsible, theoretically, central bank issuing loans to the private sector.
I don't know whether they're actually issuing loans. That's the problem, because you need loan officers for that. You need assessment. One of the reasons why we've had such a failure in the system is the centralization of commercial banks. They used to be regionally based. and they get to know their local people. I actually quite strongly agree with Richard Werner here. We should have banking at the local level far more so than at the national level. So that's the reason that's the reason to have a private banking system, if at all. The trouble is, what we ended up is the worst of both worlds. We've got highly centralized private banks that do point scoring to make loans and therefore don't have any local knowledge to begin with. You might as well have the central bank doing it and using the same bad system to do it. But I'd rather have them being in the regions, getting to know their customers, and then have relationship banking, which I think by definition has to be private.
Yeah, in the conversation I had yesterday with the fellow from Pakistan, I kind of alluded that, and this would work on a smaller scale. I don't think it would work in a developed country, is that the central bank would have branches and they would be localized. So people would be employed from that community, loan officers that understand the dynamics of the businesses that they may potentially give loans to. And it could operate in the same way as the commercial banking sector operates now, but with a higher ethical standard. Maybe that is legislated by government, that the central bank has to operate this way, and it could be more easily controlled versus trying to legislate what commercially profit orientated banks would do. But
Well,
I don't know.
Dive in, Mike. Yeah.
Well, the problem with the non-local banking is that the banks package up the loans and offload them. So if they make a poor decision, they don't have to live with it. It's a moral hazard problem. It's somebody else's problem. It's Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac's problem or something like that. So, you have to incentivize, whether it's, a local branch of the central bank to, assess risk correctly, rather than anybody who walks in. If you're a citizen, you get the loan, whether you can pay it back or not. Because then it's really not a loan. Then it's something else, right?
Right. Well, we're running over time. We could leave. If anybody has any specific questions in the chat that they want to ask, they can do that. Steve, I don't know if you see anything specifically you would like to answer. Dan, do you have any questions that you would like Steve or Mike to answer? I don't mind going longer if we just need to organically cover anything. Dan, what do you think? Is Dan frozen? Dan is having technical problems. This is a first. So Dan probably has the best technology. Oh, let's see if we can get him back. There he is.
Okay.
Did you hear anything I said? And I'm amazed that this is the first time you've had a technical issue on the show. You're usually spot on. Oh, what's going on here? Let me unmute him. Sorry, Dan.
I paid my internet bill. I mean, I don't know what's the problem. I mean, why doesn't...
I was asking, is there anything else you want out of Mike and Steve in this show? Any questions that are burning? We're over our 2 hours. There might be something in the chat that we can address. One last thing. What do you say? I'm giving it to you, Dan.
Okay, I wanted to hold it for after the show and just ask everybody in the room. So that would be Ty and Steve and Mike. There's one particular person that I wanted to have everybody look at, and that was Peter Zeihan on geopolitics. And I'm wondering if you guys know of him. I'm giving you guys, everybody here, a video to watch. And the theme that I want you to pull from Peter is deglobalization. Okay, so it's just really interesting what he talks about, and I'll share my screen here. This is what the guy looks like. This is his YouTube channel. Have you guys come across this guy at all? If not, that feature video, I'd really like you guys to watch it. It's in the chat, and maybe we can talk about it next week.
Okay. Everybody, if you're looking at, what's his name, Daniel?
Peter Zeihan, or Zeihan.
Peter Zihan, everybody that's watching the show, Daniel suggests you go watch the featured video so we can talk about it next week. He's done a good job in understanding the live stream format. Nobody wants to sit and watch long drawn out YouTube videos by other people when they can either hear Steve or I say the F word multiple times in one stream.
Fuck yeah.
Fuck yeah. How about you, Mike? Oh, Mike's at actually a respectable university, WPI, so we won't let him swear. We gotta have one sane person on the live stream, and we're gonna elect Mike to be
Not
that
gonna be
sane
me.
person.
My mom, if she saw it, would put a bar of soap in my mouth.
All right. Well, you know what, guys? I think this is where we'll end it. Guys, stay after the live stream so we can have a quick little chat. To everybody else, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you're on Twitter still, hit that retweet button, hit that like button. Make sure you're commenting underneath the video. That is the strongest thing for the algorithm on YouTube. All you got to say is great show, or you got to say, Ty, your microphone sounds like shit. Whatever you want to put, and we will see you next week. We have a very special guest. I'm not going to say who it is, but it's going to be a fun one. So check us out next week. Until then, see you later.